Dr. Jake Tribbey, why the UFL? Why do we care? Football's over. It's spring football. It's guys you barely remember from Bowling Green State University. Why do we care about the UFL?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. For me personally, a big part of this is I just love football and I want to gamble on football that's being played right now. I don't want to have to wait until the fall. As much as I love the NFL, as much as I love college ball, the UFL is happening this week and that gets me really excited. And I think one of the other reasons that I personally love the league is because, it's a league of second chances. These are all guys who got cut from NFL teams. These are all guys who are fighting for NFL roster spots in the future. And at least to me, there's something pretty inspiring about that. I mean, I'm sure everyone listening to this show has, at some point in their life sort of been counted out or, told they're not good enough to do something. And these guys are still fighting to do that. They're not making a ton of money. They're doing this to try to accomplish a greater goal. And I think there's something pretty neat about that.
That's actually, so I do love that. A lot of the guys I have known in the National Football League who they've been on this show. I just happen to have, whatever, Austin McNamara, Texas Tech punter, just like guys like that have more been UFL level. Not to say that they played in the UFL, but basically practice squad, hanging on to the 53, thinking about how football intersects with their life. There's also a UFL team in St. Louis, so I've gone. I've gone to the Battlehawks. Actually, I've been a bunch of times. I went to 2 games last year. I went to the home opener. I actually also went to the last ever OG version of the XFL game ever played. So basically in 2020, if you can rewind your brain back to that time, the XFL had just started. They were in week 2 or week 3 when all the sports started getting canceled, and the XFL thought they were going to play that weekend. So after Rudy Gobert, the whole thing, the XFL thought they were going to play. I was at the Battlehawks game. So I'm with you on just loving football. It's just incredible to have football on. What's the right way to say this? Do you enjoy the product? Because I've heard it both ways, right? Some people really like college basketball. It's clearly an inferior product. What do you make of the product on the field?
Yeah, I think overall, I think the broadcasts are really great. One of my favorite parts about the league is sort of the insider info that you get through these broadcasts. All the coaches are mic'd up, a lot of the players are mic'd up. You're getting play calls live. You get access that you don't really get in the NFL. Same thing with the officiating. They'll bring Dean Blandino on to explain a call, and maybe he'll overturn something, and you can hear his entire thought process on the broadcast. When it comes to the football itself, obviously it's not quite as good as the NFL. To me, I'd put it, maybe right below like a major college football game in terms of the overall quality. But I think part of the appeal to me as well is that, the gambling edges are pretty significant, especially compared to the NFL. So while the product quality does drop off a little bit, I think some of the information and some of the gambling edges, at least to me, make up for that.
So we are going to loop back around to actual conversations of, EJ Perry and Bryce Perkins and Louis Perez and stuff. So if you are tuning into this podcast and all you want is, I want picks, I want to know who plays where and why, that'll be timestamped in there. But this is actually what I really wanted to get to, because I have these conversations all the time, and I'm sure that you do too, of people being like, how can I get an edge? How can I win? Do I do sports betting? Do I pay for picks? Do I build my own optimizing software? Do I do my own projections? And the number one thing that I always tell people if I get that question, like, oh man, I'm getting my ass kicked in the NFL, getting my ass kicked in the NBA, whatever it might be, is there are edges for you everywhere in the niche sports if you are willing to work for them. And I think that is nowhere more true than in spring football.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we get obviously there isn't a lot of great reporting on this league. Like that's a big part of it. Injuries have improved a little bit, but especially just coach quotes, player quotes, stuff like that. There's really not much news on that. So if you're willing to, sit through some of these broadcasts, and like I said, the coaches will be mic'd up. Sometimes the announcers will give great info from, maybe their pre-production meetings with the coaches. Stuff like that are fantastic edges. There's plenty of press conferences that you can sit through. But yeah, I mean, you're totally right. The edges on these niche sports are significantly easier to find. And yeah, I mean, it just takes a lot of grinding, as you know.
It does take a lot of grinding. So what is that grind process like for you? Because people don't know, Jake is the head UFL, I was going to say just writer, but you do media, you work on the projections and everything as well over at fantasypoints.com. So what is that, cause it's basically you and the guys at ETR, Cody and Sean, as the originators. So what is that process like for you?
Yeah, so in a standard week, like generally what I'm doing is I'm watching a ton of game film. Like I said, I think, because of the insider access, this game film can be, even just the broadcast can be a lot more useful than a normal NFL broadcast would be. So I watch every game at least twice. And then another big thing that I do is I watch every coach press conference, and you can get a lot of good information through that. So, those two things combined are a big part of my process. And then, obviously diving deep into the stats, spending tons of time on projections. But yeah, really film coach quotes are the main elements of my UFL process here.
So when you're watching the film, are you like charting? Like, are you being like, Dion Kane ran 17 routes from the boundary and 13 routes from the slot? Like, what is that process like?
Yeah, so I haven't found the need to chart yet. We have, fairly decent stats from PFF, and then we also are able to pull a few things ourselves that represent not, it's not anything like you would see in say like the Fantasy Points data suite for NFL, but a pretty good like basic overview statistically to the point that I don't really think I need to chart anything. I've thought about maybe doing something like first read targets, but mostly what I'm doing is I'm just sort of taking notes, especially on injuries. I found that to be very, very helpful. Like a guy gets his hand stepped on and he misses 7 or 8 plays. That's something where if you're just looking at past few games averages of snap share, route share, whatever, you might sort of forget that. But if you note that specifically, then you can say, oh, okay, that's why his route share dipped, 10% in week 3 or what have you. So really looking just for injuries and then certain play calling tendencies. Sometimes you'll see coaches really have a specific first read in the red zone. I remember last season, Dawood Davis, whenever the Memphis Showboats got into the red zone, they always seemed to be looking at him first. Whether or not they threw it was a bit of a different story, but at least paying attention to stuff like that. So I certainly take notes, but I haven't busted out the spreadsheet to fully chart these games yet.
So what is actually what is your personal history with DFS? Because I am assuming you're a little bit younger than me. I'm 32. How old are you?
I'm 27.
You're 27. Okay, so you didn't play poker. You didn't play poker in high school. I'm assuming poker or in college.
It's funny you say that because before Black Friday, so I would have been in probably middle school around then. My dad was pretty big into online poker, just playing casually here and there. And he would, maybe my mom would nag him to go to the grocery store or whatever, and he would pull me over and be like, "Hey man, like I'm in this Sunday like massive poker tournament. I just need you to sit in and play as conservatively as possible for me." And then he'd come back 6 hours later and occasionally I'd still be playing and he'd give me like $10 and then be like, "All right, good job." And I'm sure I made him way more EV than he paid out. But yeah, I did have a little bit of experience with poker. I started playing DFS actually in high school on FanDuel. I was only 17, but if you didn't make enough to get a 1099, they did not ID verify. So I was able to play on FanDuel, and I think I maybe made $200 or $300 at 17. And I really enjoyed DFS at the time. And I really couldn't believe how many people were winning. You saw all the ads and everything. And it was just like, wow, this is really fun. And I just can't believe people are making such serious money. So I started grinding down on, trying to figure out what was going on with DFS. How are people making all this money? And I actually found, I think it was Max Steinberg who had a site. I really forget the name, but I found that, and that ended up being like a very helpful intro to sort of DFS analysis. And then I found Bale's books, and
Oh,
yeah,
the Bales books.
yeah,
Fantasy baseball, fantasy football for dumb people. Yeah, big history with the Bales books.
yeah. Reading those in like 2016, 2017, really getting obsessed with DFS. I kind of thought like, oh, I could be this great like multi-sport DFS player, grinding MLB, NBA, NFL, obviously. But through some trial and error, I sort of realized, NBA, baseball, they don't really tickle my mind enough for me to put my full heart into it. But NFL was always, football DFS was just always so captivating. I mean, obviously, Davis, the red zone product combined with refreshing DraftKings is like the ultimate dopamine rush. So yeah, from there I really just dove down on NFL. And I ended up attending the University of Cincinnati, as you can probably tell from my background or my hat. And what was funny was, right around when I was a sophomore, I was sort of like, man, I'd really like to, I'm thinking about what job I'm going to do when I'm older. Like what's the next step going to be? And I realized PFF's headquarters were like 5 minutes away from my house. They're located in downtown Cincinnati. So, I wrote some cold LinkedIn messages, eventually got my foot in the door there, and managed to sort of work my way from there to they didn't offer me any content opportunities, but I did manage to get one at Roto Grinders, and then from there ended up at Fantasy Points. So yeah, it was really great timing for me, because I'm honestly not sure what I would have done with my life had it not been for fantasy sports, DFS, and all that. But yeah, it's been quite a fun journey.
I mean, that's really interesting because you are of the right age where it's actually the same as me. I never had to have a real job. I never went into an office. Never sold insurance or never used my college degree, which is fairly uncommon, right? I mean, just generally speaking, that's not really the way that it works. It is a little bit of a grind. So, another honest conversation you have to have with yourself playing DFS is like, how good am I relative to the field? And there's varying degrees of good, right? I'm so good that I'm good at all of it. I'm good at NBA, I'm good at MLB, I have the best software, I have the best sims, whatever. Or I can tread water in NFL, donating in NBA, treading water in Major League Baseball. Like, what is your kind of personal interface with DFS now in 2025? Because it's so different, right? 2016, 2017, I mean, we're basically talking night and day.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've sort of seen that in my own performance. Obviously when I was starting out, I wasn't, that good. My results were pretty mediocre, sort of like you said, treading water. In 2020 and 2021, I actually started to win some of the low stakes tournaments that I was playing. Something like, winning $1,000 in the mini max, right when you graduate colleges, it feels pretty great. And that obviously gave me a lot of confidence heading into the 2022 season, where I got absolutely crushed because I stepped up in stakes and I just wasn't quite ready for it. So I sort of dialed things back in 23, which was sort of another treading water type year for me. And then in 24, sort of reevaluated things, did a deep dive into my results, and I realized, like, hey, I can still get pretty good action down if I just grind every single low stakes contest that exists. And these are easily my highest ROI contest, as long as I stay away from Showdown. And that ended up being huge for me in 2024. 2024 was one of my best years ever, largely because, like I said, I just really focused on the contests that I was hyper successful in, and I really dialed back my Showdown volume. For whatever reason, I've never been a very good Showdown player.
So that is very interesting, because for me, basically the opposite thing has happened. Like, the stuff where I sim out the best and the best results have been in Showdown contest and in, main slate stuff. I mean, I haven't had a good, like, strong sweat in NFL main since 2023. So basically, like, I mean, maybe I think I had one team that was like live last year, and some of my post contest sim stuff has been okay, but for me, Showdown remains. You know what I mean? I think this is what it is I feel way more comfortable being like, I don't know anything. Like, this is just a game theory game, and I just can't help myself but, like, pretend to know ball. And specifically in NFL main, it's very hard for me to go into NFL main slate and be like, I don't know what's going on, and I'll just do what the computer says. I always have to tell the computer I know better.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, I mean, especially if you're making huge stands, that can really get you in trouble for a long period of time. I think one of my biggest struggles with Showdown has always just been lineup correlation. Main slate lineup correlation just makes perfect sense to me. I feel like I understand it very well. Showdown lineup correlation, I always sort of struggle with. Like, at what point does it make sense to play a defense against a quarterback? Like against Jameis Winston, sure, that makes sense to me. But some of these guys maybe in the middle, I don't know. So I think that's been one of my biggest difficulties, is just lineup construction rather than like pure player eval.
Do you do any pre or post contest sim stuff? Because I don't think the Fantasy Points Opto has that stuff. Maybe it does, and I'm just not woke to it.
No, we don't have any sort of simulation type products. So last year, and I do think this was part of why last year ended up being a pretty good year for me. I used SaberSim pretty heavily, and also relied on those post contest sims. Obviously, the problem with the post contest sims, especially, is SaberSim users using their projections are going to sim out the best. But the
Right.
pre contest stuff can be really helpful, and it also shaves a lot of time off of using something like Fantasy Labs or Fantasy Cruncher, which is I'm in a serious relationship. Like, I'm thinking about getting engaged soon. That's, these are factors that we need to consider
For
too, is
sure.
saving a few extra hours on a Saturday.
I mean, that is incredibly real. I mean, I would basically say I don't think that sims are necessary if you are just a bro who wants to chunk in some, like, I think you
Yeah.
can still, particularly in NFL, because so many people are not great at it. They're basically just tossing in like their hunches. It's kind of like, honestly, it's kind of like sports betting, where you like there are so much dumb money coming in that like you can theoretically be smarter. Now the rake is pretty high in these contests, but if you are going to play a lot and for like meaningful money, I do think you probably need to be developing some sort of sim based process, and even just like learning, what does a sim do? What is it telling me about my teams? What what is, I mean, a huge thing based on the sim product you're using is, what is the sim not accounting for? What is the sim missing something with ownership? I need to take my sim results with a grain of salt, because as you mentioned, oh, if I'm simming out really well in these post contest sims, well, it's probably because I'm using these projections. Like, look, just like learning. I am not a mathematical guy, so like learning about sims has been a very, like, I wouldn't say difficult, but it's just been a really eye opening experience for me in DFS.
Yeah, for sure. For me too. And I think it's an interesting point, because I actually used SaberSim as well last year for a good chunk of the UFL season. And I found one thing SaberSim, and I would imagine other sim products, really struggle with, is occasionally you'll have these situations in spring football, and something like this doesn't really happen in the NFL, where maybe there's a wide receiver where his median route share is 20%, but we really don't know what the wide receiver rotation is going to look like. So there is a chance he could push for 80% of routes. The Sims really, really struggle with guys like that. They see a median of, say, 1.8 fantasy points, and they say, oh, this guy's borderline unplayable. But, there is maybe a 20% chance he's a full-time player, and that's just not quite accounted for in the median projections that they're simming out.
Well, I mean, that gets to actually coming back to UFL, which is, if you were to either have access to the perfect projections or the perfect ownership projections, right? Which is, I mean, that both of those are elements of a sim. You'd want the perfect projections every time. You could just build the actual, what is the best way to get closer to the perfect projections? It's something like that. It's where, if you are paying attention to the sport, Brian Hooper always tells me this. He's like, Davis, all you do is think about football. It would be insane for you to just play all projections straight up when you're like, oh, well, there's a reason why Aaron Jones might not hit his projection, or there's a reason why Jalen Waddle is being underprojected here. It would be stupid of you to spend time in your life having that knowledge and then not using it. And that, I mean, now, people, don't get me wrong, you can definitely get yourself in trouble there, because you don't want to IKB all the projections. You don't want to go into a projection set and be like, well, that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong. But the reason why I asked was, have you ever made projections for anything other than UFL?
So I do help out with the Fantasy Points NFL projections, but UFL projections really are my main projections work. I certainly haven't done any sports outside of football in terms of projecting player performance.
So compare that process, because I've done NFL projections, and I have seen the inner workings of how NBA and MLB projections work from like a content side, but I'm wondering how different or similar that is for UFL.
For UFL compared to NFL?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think the biggest difference for us internally is that we just don't have quite as much data. So we did have to
data.
simplify things a little bit, especially with the Fantasy Points data suite. We have access to basically every data point that you could imagine mattering in projections. Not only that, but we also have a great historical sample. So we'll, in our little projections column, we'll have, our projection for the week, the last 3 weeks what that player's done, maybe the last 6 weeks what the player's done, and then his career average as well. And that career average probably goes back 4 or 5 seasons. Obviously, you wouldn't have something like that in the UFL. So I think the biggest difference is just raw data limitations. It's a pretty comparable amount of data to if you were doing projections for like FCS football games, something like that, I'd say.
Yeah. So the other thing is most NFL projection sets, like I know like ETR does a lot of market checking. Like everyone is going to do market checking. You're going to check your stuff against player props. You are going to check your stuff against team totals. Like frankly, I think the only guy I know who really just totally IKBs Vegas stuff is Cardi. And I think Cardi has like some respect built in, but his NFL projections will be the furthest off from the market that you will find. But I'm assuming it is much more difficult to do that market baking in UFL when the market is so weak.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that extends to just Vegas totals, like you said. Like these Vegas totals are not gospel, like they are in NFL. I mean, NFL Sunday totals are, by the time you get to Saturday, Friday, those are really, really strong numbers. The Vegas totals we're looking at for UFL this week are pretty soft. So I really don't mind in NFL. Like you'll rarely see us be more than maybe a point in either direction above or below a team's implied total. And UFL, that probably extends to maybe 2 or 3 points on either side. Yeah, and same thing with projections. It's really just us and ETR at this point. So obviously we'll check ourselves against them, but at a certain point, like we can't fully understand how they're getting to their numbers. So you just kind of got to trust the information that you have and whatever your best guess is.
I mean, there's like this fascinating element that goes on with these niche sports when it's like, so like college basketball, really good example. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
ETR has a product and Roto Grinders has a product, and that's it. So it's basically, and like, so I know it's like Dan and Jamino at Roto Grinders did the college basketball projections, and I know Alex and Sean did the ETRs. So I was like, all right, well, I'm trusting these 4 dudes to like know what Derek Queen's minute situation are like, and if they're wrong, and in NFL you feel less that way because you're like, okay, well, everyone has projections and everyone has access to this information. So the smaller and the more niche it gets, the more kind of like it's a leveling game to some degree. I mean, one of the things I'm wondering in UFL DFS is if there is like some value in totally fading whatever, like not like Adrian Martinez from last year, like that would be a good example. Like he was just the stone nuts, but like if there's ever going to be a 47% owned wide receiver in UFL DFS, or make this your equivalent in college basketball DFS or whatever small sport you're doing where the projection sources are so limited and it's so finite, just like being like, all right, I'm just taking the shot on my entry set that the entire market is wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially like you said. I mean, I think certain positions in UFL, really good idea to take advantage of that. At wide receiver last year, I believe in week 1, we saw Hakeem Butler right around 45% ownership. And, he ended up being a total dud. So, yeah, I think whenever the ownership runs on a position like wide receiver, it makes sense to get away from it. And whenever there's a big fade on quarterbacks where they assume a split, I don't necessarily mind leaning into that a little bit, because sometimes you'll just see, like, I mean, this week, it looks like we're going to have 4 or 5 different teams probably splitting their quarterback position. And I really don't mind just saying, look, I think Alex Magoo is better than Matt Corral. If Alex Magoo starts the game and, gets hot, he probably plays the full game. I think Bryce Perkins is better than Danny Etling. If Perkins starts the game and gets hot, he probably gets the full game. Both of those guys are going to have, notable ownership reductions because every site's projecting a split there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's pretty interesting. I mean, also UFL betting. I mean, I know that I know our good friends at the Dog app have some projection stuff up that they'll let you do. I mean, there's sides and totals that you can take. I mean, I'm assuming that's one of the spots where probably if you have a really sharp side on a Birmingham Stallions game, you are probably going to get your account nuked pretty quickly. But what are the opportunities like for betting on the UFL?
Yeah, I mean, you already highlighted it. Pretty much every book will have sides and totals for the UFL. Most books also have championship futures up right now. My current favorite bet is if you can find Michigan plus 700, plus 650. I like that quite a bit. Beyond that, Prize Picks and Underdog should both have their, pick 'em player prop offering. And then last year in week 6, ESPN Bet started doing just straight up player props, only with minus 115 on either side, which was really really nice, and we ended up doing really well on that. The unfortunate part is that they will limit you pretty quick. I think I had one account limited after making maybe about $1,000, and my second account got me through the end of the year. I'm hopeful that they will list player props in week 1, ESPN Bet. But obviously no guarantees. They might think it's just a bit too risky and lay off until week 2 or week 3. But I am expecting a bit of a player prop product from them at some point.
What is that stuff that you guys offer in the UFL subscription at Fantasy Points, player props and stuff like that?
Yeah. So, we have projections, obviously, as a part of our UFL subscription over at Fantasy Points. And then in the Discord, I sort of treat our paywalled UFL Discord as like my personal diary during the season. I will, post, all of our official player prop picks. Last year, I think we went 22, 11, and 2 for a 30% ROI, which was pretty great. So I will post all of our picks in our Discord. I also do some showdown analysis because obviously Fantasy Points does not want me spamming showdown articles on the site for UFL contests that have $1,000 or $2,000 to first place. But I'll do sort of mini versions of that in our Discord. And then that's also where I post, any sort of interesting notes that I find throughout the week, watching film, listening to press conferences. So yeah, player props, certainly a part of our subscription. Definitely get in the Discord if you want to get the picks there.
All right, let's break into the teams a little bit. So if you're not hip, there are 8 teams in the UFL: the Battlehawks, the Houston Roughnecks, the San Antonio Brahmas, the Arlington Rough Riders,
Renegades,
the Michigan Panthers, the Memphis, not going to get that one. Memphis Showboats, the DC Defenders, and the Birmingham Stallions. That was all off the top of my head. So I'm pretty impressed with that one. What's the best team and what is the worst team of that group of 8?
Yeah, so that's a pretty easy one. The best team is the Birmingham Stallions. They won back-to-back USFL titles before the merger. They won the 2024 UFL title. They played in 36 games over the last 3 seasons. They've won 88% of those games. This is a very, very good football team. Tons of continuity. It's been the same head coach throughout, Skip Holtz, who is a really good coach. One of the things that I love about Skip Holtz in particular, and this really isn't a relevant fantasy note, but I just think it's really cool, is he's huge on just not yelling and teaching. And, so many football coaches, guy makes a mistake and they just immediately go insane. Skip Holtz is like, hey, man, why'd you do that? Talk to me. And I just think that's a great way to approach it, especially when you're trying to build these guys up for the NFL. So Birmingham, best coaches, fantastic players, tons of continuity. Pretty much every player wants to play for Birmingham because these guys get paid per game, and Birmingham almost always gets to play 2 extra games because of the playoffs. And then the worst team, another easy one. It's the Houston Roughnecks. They have easily the worst coach in Curtis Johnson, who is totally incompetent in basically every way. Their quarterback situation is not great. Anthony Brown's a little interesting. I
was going to say Anthony Brown, NFL experience, Mr. Anthony Brown.
Yeah, he's a little interesting. I'm worried. I think Nolan Henderson is going to be the favorite to start. I think right now we have it projected about 60-40 in favor of Henderson. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a split. And, overall, this is a team, especially on offense, that just really struggles to get their best players the ball. I still have some hope that Houston could be okay this year, but I think at this point, pretty easy to call them the worst team. If there was another team in contention, it would be the Memphis Showboats. Their head coach, Ken Wisenhunt, just took a leave of absence 3 days ago, which can't be a good sign. And looking at the roster, it doesn't look great, at least offensively. So they would be the second worst team, but I still think Houston is pretty clearly the worst, at least as we enter week 1.
All right. So these are the starting quarterbacks with a projection in week 1 in my sheet. Alex Magoo. I actually don't know him. Kellen Mond, Texas A&M. Jordan Ta'amu. He was actually, I believe he has a Super Bowl ring. He was on the Kansas City Chiefs. practice squad. Nolan Henderson, I don't know him. Luis Perez, who was a Los Angeles Ram, used to be awesome in the NFL preseason. Manny Wilkins, I actually don't know him. Do I know him? Where'd he go to college? Manny Wilkins.
I'm not sure it was
I
anywhere
lost.
notable. Arizona State.
Arizona State. All right, I don't know him. Bryce Perkins, also of the Los Angeles Rams and of Virginia Tech. And then outside of that, it looks like mostly that we are into the quarterback carousel. Memphis has EJ Perry, who I do know, and Troy Williams, who I do not know. I would say I do not know anything about this Magoo fella, but Ta'amu and Perez are like good enough, and I have no opinions on the others.
Yeah. So, I mean, starting with Magoo, he is a really, really good quarterback, especially for fantasy purposes. So he was the 2023 USFL MVP, and then he ended up signing with the Green Bay Packers in 2024 and was their QB3 throughout that season. The Packers then moved him to wide receiver and cut him like 2 weeks later, which led to him re-signing with Birmingham. Here's an absolutely insane stat. Top 5 quarterback fantasy seasons of all time in professional football history. 2019 Lamar Jackson, 2018 Patrick Mahomes, 2013 Peyton Manning, 2024 Adrian Martinez with the Birmingham Stallions last year, 2023 Alex Magoo with the Birmingham Stallions 2 years ago. So, that should put into perspective how good, this quarterback role can be for Birmingham as long as a guy's getting 100% of the snaps. And that's sort of the uphill battle for Magoo right now. Coach Holtz really likes Matt Corral as a backup. And, at least based on his most recent quotes, I sort of anticipate a bit of a split there. But, obviously we also have to price in that Magoo is just really good. So he's popping a bit more in efficiency stuff. And I think, I'm sure ETR probably has him with a slightly higher projection than Corral right now, but he's just a tough click when you're not sure if he's going to play 50% of snaps, 80%, 100. We just don't really know in week 1 yet.
I mean, Matt Corral is bad. Matt Corral should this dude is washed out at every level of football he's ever played in. Although to me, this is the fun part of this league is being like, oh man, I remember Holton Allers at Eastern Carolina University. Adrian Martinez right now is a member of the New York Footballing Jets. I think he even got into a game last year. I want to say he got in garbage time. I know he played in the preseason, but the league is going to miss him big time. Adrian Martinez was a good part of the league, and we appreciated him. But actually, the quarterbacks are sort of only one part of the story because, as you might guess, with the UFL, it's a running league. These are mostly conservative coaches who are, as we learned, Ken Wisenhunt showing up. It's mostly guys who've been around football their whole lives and are not quite ready to be. It's not. You're not getting the McVay tree up and coming 37-year-old who's got a bunch of ideas about analytics coaching these teams, which I think the league would obviously be better if that was the type of, but they just don't have the money. And there's no upward mobility. If the UFL still exists in 10 years and there's more money in it and there's a relationship between the leagues, then maybe it's possible. But right now it veers much more into dinosaur territory.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And that's why, occasionally you get an offensive coordinator like AJ Smith for the San Antonio Brahmas, who is more of an up and coming younger OC. Those are certainly the guys you want to pay attention to. But yeah, generally when I'm building in my projections, I do have a little bit of concern for guys like Wisenhunt and their ability to, adapt to the way the game has changed, even just over the last few years.
So because it is less of a passing league and a little bit less of a forward-thinking league, it means that the running backs, it means the teams run a lot, and it means that running backs who generate huge volume, like they consolidate it on their team. Because the other thing is most teams use 2 guys, maybe sometimes even 3. St. Louis actually used 3 guys quite a bit last year. They had like I'm gonna forget all their names. Brian
Jacob
Hill,
Taylor's,
Brian Hill, and then the third down back whose name I can't remember.
Yeah, so Brian Hill was actually in the 2023 XFL.
There we
It
go.
was Wayne Gallman last year was the NFL
Wayne
vet that I
Gallman.
think a lot of
Yeah.
people would recognize. But most teams will keep, St. Louis was a bit different, I think, because they were using one of those backs on special teams. But because of the limited roster size, I believe it's only 46 active on game day in the UFL. Most teams will only keep 2 backs, which does open the door to pretty good running back usage.
All right. I got to figure out what I'm thinking of then. Yeah, because so there's only 2 guys here. It was I'll figure it out. But anyway, larger point is who are the workhorse running backs in the UFL right now before we head into week 1?
Yeah. Obviously crucial for fantasy. I think, one of the biggest ones to start is going to be Jacob Sailors for St. Louis. He was right around, 75% of backfield usage last year. Now they did throw us some usage curveballs, but overall he was very consistent. My one concern with Sailors right now, it's Manny Wilkins and Max Duggan fighting for the quarterback position in St. Louis. Obviously Max Duggan, more of a pocket passer, not as much of a runner. Manny Wilkins is kind of a glorified running back playing quarterback. He really can't throw particularly well, and he loves to run when he drops back. He especially loves to run inside the 10. So, I think like both of these quarterbacks offer different pluses and minuses for a guy like Sailors. Duggan is going to throw to running backs a lot more often than a guy like Wilkins will. Wilkins probably reduces Sailors' touchdown equity a little bit. So, that's an important thing to remember for them. Either way, that won't swing his projection by more than, I'd say, a point or two. And right now we're projecting a split. So not a huge difference there. Another guy who's really interesting is Abram Smith for the DC Defenders. So he was a massive bell cow in 2023. He was playing, about 80% of the snaps. He, I believe, has the modern spring football rushing record for the regular season. And then he tore his ACL ahead of the 2024 camp. DC ended up having an extremely inefficient rushing attack, ended up struggling quite a bit offensively. We sort of anticipate him being a bell cow this year. He's 12 months removed from his ACL repair. Part of me is a little concerned that maybe he won't be 100% healthy. Maybe we'll see a little bit more Deion Jackson, formerly of the Colts.
I was going to say they have another NFL player on the roster from Duke.
Yeah, exactly. So, it'll be interesting to see what that split is. But as of right now, I'm sort of tentatively expecting maybe 65%, 70% of backfield snaps and touches for a guy like Abram Smith. Unfortunately, Jordan Ta'amu does not throw to running backs. So there's basically no receiving work for a guy like Abram Smith. In my week 1 article that will be out tomorrow, I kind of comped him to a player like Derrick Henry, where especially in the games that you expect DC to win, Abram Smith is generally a really good play because he could push for 20 plus carries. Outside of those guys, the San Antonio backfield is looking to be really valuable. This was the single most valuable backfield in the UFL last season, led by John Lovett, who's more of their between the tackles, grind it down, tons of carries kind of guy, and Anthony McFarland, who I'm sure a lot of football fans will remember from the Steelers.
Steelers.
Yeah, McFarland was tremendously efficient. We can't project him for, some great workload because, like I said, John Lovett's going to take a lot of the carries, especially the stuff in the red zone. But McFarland, by yards per scrimmage per touch and by weighted opportunity differential, so just comparing his weighted opportunity to his actual fantasy points scored, was easily the most efficient running back in the league last season. So he's a guy that I really like, especially if you expect, San Antonio to play in like a shootout type script. He's going to get a ton of passing game work, probably 4 to 6 targets per game. And like I said, tremendously explosive. I think the only other guy worth mentioning, and, I don't really anticipate this guy being a bell cow, but he is really interesting, is Kirk Merritt for Houston. I already highlighted Houston as being one of the worst teams in the UFL. That means they're going to be playing from behind quite a bit. Kirk Merritt only played 3 games last season, but he averaged 5.5 targets per game, which is pretty great for a UFL running back. Houston has regarded him as both a receiver and a running back, so he might actually get some snaps in the slot or out wide. In 2-minute drill type situations, they'll keep him in, and they actually will give him carries inside the 10, inside the 5. And head coach Curtis Johnson, who, I really don't trust his coach speak much, but at least when it comes to player skill and how much players mean to the team, he is generally pretty straightforward. He said Kirk Merritt's one of their best players in one of the press conferences that I attended earlier this offseason. So I'm really excited for Kirk Merritt, and he's a bit more reasonably priced on DraftKings than some of the other players that I mentioned. I believe he's 6,600 this week.
Yeah, Kirk Merritt, a Dolphin, a Saint, was a wide receiver for the Dolphins, got converted to a running back by the Saints, actually got a little bit of PT for them in 2023, I believe, and then was in the UFL last year. I believe he's a 10 RAS guy. It might have been like 9.99 or whatever, but like an uber elite RAS guy. So that was a look at Deneric Prince. For those of you who are big slappies and remember him, he is on the awful Memphis Showboats. I'm trying to say if there's any other names. Kalen Balaj is on Arlington. And I think that's it in terms of NFL guys that I recognize.
Yeah, Balaj is pretty interesting because I wrote him up. I sort of did an overarching UFL, running back bell cow report a few weeks ago. And I wrote Balaj up as like, oh, this is a guy who could see great usage. Then the Renegades go and they re-sign Davion Smith, who is, basically in their sort of, workhorse, big body between the tackle role last season. And that's what I anticipate Kalen Balaj to do this year. So it'll be really interesting. We should, get this information in the next few days. Who will be active between Balaj and Davion Smith? If both players are active, this backfield's probably pretty gross. If it's just one of them, though, then, that player could pretty easily push for 12 to 15 carries and another 2 to 3 targets on a team that should have a pretty competent offense with Luis Perez quarterbacking them. So that's a backfield I'm definitely keeping my eye on as we get more news about inactives.
All right. Another very fun. I mean, really, actually, the wide receiver tight ends have been the more successful transitions from spring football to professional football. We've seen like 4 or 5 guys transition over. I mean, the one everyone knows is Donald Parham led the original XFL in receiving yards. Cam Moore ended up signing and playing a little bit for the Panthers with PJ Walker. They were Houston Roughnecks, I think. But there's been multiple examples of guys playing well. Hakeem Butler converted to tight end after playing in the UFL. So there's been some examples here and is now back for the St. Louis Battlehawks. We've got Tyler Vaughns. We've got Deion Kane, who used to play for the Colts. Kiki Chisholm. You guys might remember him. What is the who is the the Des Bryant right now of the UFL?
Yeah, so right now I'd probably have to say John Trey Kirkland. San Antonio is a relatively pass happy offense. They have a ton of great concepts, and a lot of them revolve around John Trey Kirkland. I believe he spent some time with the Saints a few years back. He's still relatively young at 25. He played on the LSU team that had Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Terrace Marshall, and obviously basically never saw the field because those other wide receivers were so great. I think the year after he ended up starting their bowl game as a quarterback, and you will see their offensive coordinator AJ Smith take advantage of his quarterback abilities. I can basically guarantee John Trey Kirkland will throw a couple passes this year. Kirkland's expensive, but it's for good reason. He'll be top 3, top 5 in the league in target share, routes run, every relevant fantasy relevant receiving metric. So I'd have to consider Kirkland the Des Bryant for right now.
How has Sal Cannella not gotten an NFL tryout? I feel like NFL teams are so desperate for guys who play like that. Like, come on, man, he's got to be better than like Luke Farrell. He's like a very good player in the UFL.
Yeah, he's a great receiver. He played wide receiver in college at Auburn. I would imagine what's holding him back is his ability to block. I think NFL teams probably view him as like a poor man's Mike Gesicki, and that's
Brutal.
not necessarily a role a lot of teams have in mind for a player. So I would imagine it's blocking and raw physicality that's holding Cannella back. But he is a fantastic receiver. He's basically a glorified slot for Arlington.
Yeah. We also have, in terms of names people would recognize, Jay Sternberger of the Green Bay Packers. Cole Hikatuni, the San Francisco 49ers, is in there. Who else is it? Jaden Mickens, people would recognize him. Greg Ward, Super Bowl champion. Greg Ward. I mean, this is Puka's little brother, Samson Nakua, is in the UFL. Sam Wiglu's of the Los Angeles Rams. A lot of these guys who didn't quite make it for the Rams. Alize Mack, who was a 4th round pick, I want to say, to the Raiders. He played at Notre Dame. There's more talent than you'd think. Another former Ram, Jacob Harris, is in here. This is basically the Rams practice squad, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, and I mean, you're right. There is a pretty good amount of NFL talent. You'll see a lot of guys that were day 3 picks in this league, which I think generally speaks to pretty decent football quality overall, because these players are good. They're right below the NFL cut line. And they all still seem to think they have a lot of football left, and I generally agree. So yeah, like you said, there's a lot of talent here.
Yeah, there's a ton of talent. All right, let's talk a little bit of general tournament strategy, and we can get you out of here. Base roster construction. The tournament sizes are going to be a little bit smaller than you'd be used to for NFL. I think it's 20K to first for week one. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So 20K to first. We'll see. I mean, one, if you're listening to this, please fill it. And so that we can keep the prize pools the same. What are stack situations like? How do you treat, real chalk if, fill in slot wide receiver of the week is going to be 37%? Are you jamming it? Is it case by case? Just kind of your general construction thoughts.
Yeah, so I think with construction, probably the most unique thing with the UFL, especially in week one, is that we just don't know if a lot of these quarterbacks are going to get a full game. So, a big part of my strategy will be leaning into the guys that we, can be fairly certain are going to get 100% of snaps. Luis Perez, Jordan Ta'amu, Kellen Mond for San Antonio. And then, I'm fine with single stacks, double stacks, even, with a guy like Perez, a pocket passer where, we know that the offense is going to be condensed around about 4 pass catchers. I really don't even mind a triple stack. I think you can go pretty heavy on some of these game environments. And because, the roster size is only 7 players, including defense, compared to, 9 for the NFL. If you do go heavy on a game stack and you hit, I mean, that's basically your entire lineup, right? So really don't mind that as sort of an overarching strategy. When it comes to the chalky plays, I would say it's generally a case by case basis. I feel like I have a pretty good grip on the range of outcomes for just about every player in the league. So it just really depends on who the chalky player is and how iffy, his playing time may or may not be. Sometimes we sort of assume, so-and-so is going to step into that slot wide receiver role and he's only 3,500, but, maybe the team intends on splitting it up or playing a tight end a little bit more. So, I think on some of those chalky spots, especially if it's injury related and we don't have a good coach quote, if someone's pressing for a ton of ownership, it does make sense to take your foot off the gas a little bit.
That would basically be my advice, and I am, mostly playing this from the outside, but my process is every week is I will look at the ETR projections. I read Jake's article on fantasypoints.com, and generally speaking, and the way this is going to sound is like I'm negging you, but it's not at all. But you and the ETR guys are going to be the biggest drivers of chalk. So if the sense I get from reading your $5,700 wide receiver piece of the week is it's like a gut play or it's based on this data, but the data is uncertain, and I think that guy's going to be 27%. Even if you're right, I'm like, well, the theoretical EV of my lineup is just going to be better from fading this guy with the 9.5 point projection. Not to say you should never do it, but that's just the way that I think of it a lot of the time. Now, not 100% of the time. If it's, I don't know. I mean, frankly, a lot of the times when I'm building in these, I do gravitate a lot towards the guys who I know. Like if Cornell Powell for the DC Defenders ends up being a smash some week, I watched him at Clemson. He was a Kansas City Chief. I'm just like, well, I'm probably just going to slot that guy in. But if it's Isaiah Henney, who I do not know, don't know where he went to college, don't know anything about him, I'm going to be a little bit less likely to jam them in. But I do think in general, it is good advice. I mean, obviously you want to have access to good projections. You want to be following it, but those relatively fragile chalk spots where it's based on an assumption, I mean, particularly in week one, we're making a shit ton of assumptions. I would say you're going to be very EV doing nothing else other than fading. Particularly at wide receiver. Running back, I'm much less. You just want to play the best plays at running back, I think, because they can be the slate enders very quickly.
Yeah, I'm certainly with you there. I think the one thing that I'll look for in running backs is, occasionally you'll get these guys in like the 4 to 6K range who don't play a ton, but they do get, a good amount of red zone touches. And, if a guy in that range scores twice, you're looking really good. Another note that I wanted to add for this season is, assuming the same cadence as last year for depth chart and inactive releases, we should get each game's inactives 48 hours ahead of time. Now, this season's a little bit different because games start on Friday, which means that we likely will not have Sunday inactives, maybe not every week, but a good amount of weeks, I would imagine, until after lock of the main slate. So I would build your lineups with that in mind. I would not go, overboard on, say, like a Friday game stack where you leave yourself some 3K wide receiver on a Sunday game who may or may not be active, right? So I would certainly keep that in mind when you're building lineups as well.
For sure. All right, I think we gave people a good foundation there. Jake, why don't you tell people about the Fantasy Points product, where they can access it? You guys do the Fantasy Points show. I guess you guys used to do it on Saturdays, but probably not anymore because there are going to be games on Fridays now.
Yeah, so we last year we did it on Fridays. This year we're moving it to Thursdays at 4 p.m. So that'll be over on the Fantasy Points YouTube channel. You can also check my Twitter. I'll always tweet out the link. I think I probably had a scheduled tweet go out in the last hour or so about that. So yeah, me and Neil Orfield tomorrow at 4 p.m. if you want to listen to that show. That's always free. We always enjoy interacting with the chat and really appreciate everybody listening. Then when it comes to the Fantasy Points product, you can subscribe over at fantasypoints.com, get our UFL projections, get access to my articles, which will be paywalled probably about 70% of the time. And then you can also get access to our paywall Discord, which is where I drop pretty much all of the best, most juicy info that I get throughout the week. Like I said earlier in the show, I'll do full showdown slate breakdowns in there. I'll do Sunday only slate breakdowns in there because, like I said, Fantasy Points does not want me spamming the website with tons of niche UFL articles. Our player prop picks will also be in there. Occasionally I'll post picks for sides and totals, but player props and, the underdog prize pick stuff is generally our bread and butter over there. So definitely check out our paywall Discord if you do plan on subbing to the Fantasy Points UFL product. Product is also included in our all-in subscription. And if you use promo code ALLUFL in all caps, that'll get you 20% off our all-in sub. I think it saves you $80. So yeah, definitely check all that out.
And yeah, if you are interested in signing up for things over there, I do use the Fantasy Points data suite, the tools for the NFL, and it's pretty nifty. It's pretty handy. All right, guys, make sure that you're following Jake on Twitter at Jake Tribbey. Check out the stuff over at Fantasy Points, and I'll be back with all of you guys next week.